So usually when you meet someone for the very first time, there's this kind of invisible script that you're both expected to follow. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
definitely. A handshake, a quick nod, and then boom, out comes the label.
All right. It's like, hi, I'm a regional director, or I'm a senior graphic designer, or I'm pediatrician. We just carry these titles around like armor.
Well, because it's the quickest way to establish hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And just function in a room. We trade these labels to figure out exactly how much weight to give someone's opinion or even just to know what topics are safe to discuss. It completely maps out the social territory before the conversation even really begins.
Which, I mean, it makes sense. It's highly efficient. When you walk into a room wearing your professional title, it acts like a uniform.
Exactly.
Everyone sees the uniform, they know exactly what function you serve, and it keeps interactions clean and predictable. But it really begs a question, and it's something I want you, the listener, to think about today. What happens when you take that uniform off?
And for most people, taking off that uniform is a genuinely terrifying prospect. Our entire society is structured to reward the accumulation of titles.
Right.
You know, the progression from junior to senior, from manager to vice president, that is the defined metric of a successful life for so many of us.
And that is exactly why the material we are doing a deep dive into today is just so deeply subversive.
Yeah.
We've got this fascinating stack of personal essays written by a Japanese author who has spent over 4 decades navigating the intense, highly structured world of the corporate salaryman.
40 years, just think about that.
Right. He has worn all the heavy costumes. He's been the manager, the father, the responsible senior colleague. But as he approaches the end of his career, he introduces this philosophy that it flips our entire value system on its head.
It really does.
He argues that the ultimate goal in life isn't actually to become a somebody. The true victory, the actual peak of human existence, is successfully transitioning into a nobody.
Yeah, or as he calls it in Japanese, ananima no demonai yatsu.
Yes. And that's our core mission today. We really want to answer that specific question. What does the author actually mean by a nobody?
It's a radical reframing of identity because, he isn't talking about becoming a nobody in the sense of being a failure or being invisible.
No, not at all.
He is talking about the profound psychological liberation that happens when you finally strip away those societal labels that dictate your behavior.
And I want to be super clear with you, the listener, right up front here. This isn't some dry, boring corporate memoir about climbing the ladder or like basic retirement planning.
Oh, definitely not.
This is deeply introspective, it's often hilarious, and honestly, sometimes it's painfully raw when he explores the human condition.
The breadth of the source material is really what makes it so compelling to me. I mean, he uses these seemingly disconnected moments from his life to build out this philosophy.
It's like what?
Well, we're going to look at mundane office interactions, the brutal legacy of World War II air raids, the psychological trap of the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, and even his sudden desire to get a punch perm haircut at age 65.
Punch pump. I love that part. It's so good. But okay, to understand what he means by a nobody, we really have to first understand the invisible prison of being a somebody. The author points out that our titles actually become our cages.
They do.
You aren't just a person who happens to be a company president, you are the president. And because you are the president, there is this rigid set of expectations dictating how you must behave, even when you aren't actively working.
Right. And the Japanese actually have a specific term for this phenomenon, which the author unpacks beautifully. It's called rashisa.
Rashis.
Yeah. It roughly translates to being typical or acting in accordance with the essence of your label. So if you are a teacher, you must exhibit teacher likeness. If you are a senior manager, you must constantly project manager likeness.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because I'm struggling a bit with why this is inherently negative. Like, if you are a senior manager, shouldn't you act like one? People rely on that stability.
Yeah.
If the captain of a ship suddenly decides he doesn't want to act like a captain anymore, well, the ship sinks, right?
Functionally, yes. In a professional environment, the roles are obviously necessary. But the psychological danger happens when rashisa bleeds into your fundamental identity, which, let's be honest, it almost always does.
Yeah.
The expectation doesn't just dictate your professional output anymore, it dictates your emotional expression.
Yeah.
The label flattens you into this two-dimensional character.
Wow, okay. And he illustrates this perfectly with this incredibly mundane yet totally revealing incident at his office.
The baby story.
The baby story. So one of his younger female coworkers was on maternity leave, and she decided to visit the office with their new baby. Now, the author notes in the essays that he absolutely adores babies, It is a genuine core part of his personality.
Right.
So when he sees this baby, his immediate unfiltered reaction is just pure joy. He rushes over, his face breaks into this massive ear-to-ear grin, and he starts cooing over the child.
Which is a completely universal, deeply human reaction to seeing an infant.
Right. He even notes that if it were his own grandchild, he would have just swept the baby up into a massive hug. But, and this is the crazy part, the reaction of the younger colleagues in the office wasn't to share in the joy.
No, not at all.
Instead, they were visibly shocked. They looked at him and said things like, "Wow, we've never seen this side of you, and you should really make that face more often."
Which completely baffles him.
He is genuinely confused. In his mind, he thinks he's an approachable guy. He thinks he jokes around, he thinks he smiles at work. But that external feedback from his colleagues was basically a mirror showing him the reality of his label.
Yeah, exactly.
To them, he was not a multidimensional human being who loves babies. He was the strict senior colleague. That was his Rashisa.
And when someone says, "Oh, that is so out of character for you," what they are really saying is, "You have violated the parameters of the label I assigned to you."
Wow.
The colleagues were jarred because a strict senior colleague does not beam at an infant. It breaks the continuity of the environment they've gotten used to.
So the title is actually a mechanism of social control.
Yeah.
Isn't having a title kind of like wearing a heavy mascot costume?
That's a great way to put it.
It gets you attention and you have a clear role, but you can't actually feel the breeze on your skin.
Yeah.
But society demands we wear the costume.
Precisely. It is a magic word that simplifies complex human beings. Society likes labels because multidimensional people are unpredictable. They require effort to understand.
Right.
Stereotypes are efficient. If you are the stern boss, I know exactly how to interact with you. But to maintain that efficiency, the individual wearing the label has to constantly perform the role.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. You are constantly policing your own natural reactions so you don't confuse the people around you. You want to smile at the baby, but the label demands you maintain this measured professional distance.
And this right here is the core liberation of being a nobody. When you finally lose the title, whether it's through retirement or just a conscious philosophical shift, you are released from the performance.
You can just take off the mascot hat.
Exactly. You no longer owe anyone their version of your Rashisa. You have the freedom to meet people with zero preconceptions. You aren't forcing them to interact with a title. And crucially, you aren't forcing yourself to live up to one.
But dropping that label isn't just about how you act in an office. What I find super interesting is how the author takes this concept of abandoning the perfect persona and he turns it inward. Specifically, he looks at his own physical body.
Yes.
He connects the societal expectation of perfection to the physical reality of aging.
Yes, somebody is deeply tied to the illusion of control. We genuinely believe that if we just try hard enough, we can control our careers, our reputations, and even our physical vessels.
So he tells this hilarious story about a physical test he saw a top athlete demonstrate on TV, probably like 20 years ago. The athlete on the screen claimed that if you have high athletic ability, you should be able to move your body exactly as your brain intends.
Right.
And the test was deceptively simple. Close your eyes, raise both arms out to your sides, and hold them perfectly horizontal, like a straight line.
It is a basic test of proprioception.
Proprioception.
Yeah, so proprioception is your nervous system's ability to sense the position and movement of your body parts in relation to one another, entirely without visual feedback. Top athletes have incredibly refined proprioceptive maps in their brains.
Okay, so the author, he's just sitting in his living room and he thinks this is a joke. He assumes it will be effortless.
Of course.
He closes his eyes, raises his arms, and feels entirely confident that he is mimicking a perfect horizontal line. He is completely secure in his internal map. Then he opens his eyes and looks in the mirror.
And the internal map does not match the external reality.
Not even close. He is shocked to see that his arms aren't horizontal at all. He is tilted, lopsided, and entirely wobbly. He actually compares his reflection to a broken yajirobe.
Right. A yajirobe is a traditional Japanese balancing toy. It's usually made of bamboo, and it has this central pivot point with two weighted arms dipping downward. When it is perfectly balanced, it just rests stably on a fingertip.
But he was a broken one. One arm was higher than the other, totally out of alignment. He describes feeling this wave of pathetic realization about his declining physical control.
It's a tough moment.
And over the next few weeks, he actually tries to train himself out of it. He keeps practicing this mirror test. and proudly notes that he eventually upgraded his posture from a broken yajirobe to what he calls a clumsy Y shape.
Which fundamentally is still not horizontal.
No, it's a complete failure of the test.
Yeah.
But, and this is the beautiful part, he leans into the failure. And here's where I need you to help me connect the dots, because this is really interesting. Why is this specific, somewhat embarrassing realization about his failing proprioception the bedrock of his philosophy about being a nobody? Like, how does physical clumsiness translate to dropping a corporate label?
Because the physical clumsiness is a tangible, undeniable metaphor for emotional clumsiness.
Oh.
When we hold a prestigious title, we project an aura of total mastery. The senior director is supposed to be in complete control of their faculties, their decisions, their temper. But the Yajirobe test shatters that illusion. If you cannot even instruct your own arm to hold a horizontal position, how can you possibly claim to have perfect control over your complex, rapid-fire emotional responses?
That makes so much sense. It's like relying on your internal GPS, only to find out it hasn't been updated since 2012. You think you're on the highway, but you're actually in a lake.
Exactly. The internal map of our emotions is just as flawed as the internal map of our limbs.
And he is intensely reflective about this. He looks back on his life and realizes how often his mind and body have completely betrayed his intentions. He thinks about the times he intended to offer mild, constructive criticism, but what actually came out of his mouth were these harsh, cutting words that he instantly regretted.
He misjudged the emotional weight he was throwing around, just like he misjudged the angle of his arms.
You think you are completely level, but you are actually violently tilted, and you are just knocking over everything in the room without even realizing it.
And accepting this inherent, unavoidable clumsiness is the very definition of becoming a nobody.
Right.
A somebody has to defend their mistakes to protect their title. A somebody cannot admit they lost control because it damages their rishisa. But unnobody can look in the mirror, see the broken Yajirobe, and simply say, yes, I am a flawed, wobbly human being.
It takes an enormous amount of ego death to reach that point, though. But what is the practical application of this? If we just accept that we are emotionally clumsy, doesn't that risk becoming a free pass for bad behavior?
What do you mean? Like, you could just say, sorry, I screamed at you in that meeting. I'm just a broken Yajirobe. I can't help it.
Ah, right. But that is the crucial distinction here. He isn't using it as an excuse to cause harm. He is using it as a foundation for mutual grace.
Mutual grace.
Yes. This is the profound so what insight of the Yajiro philosophy. Acknowledging our mutual imperfection is the exact mechanism that creates human intimacy. Think about the people you feel closest to in your own life. Is it the people who project flawless mastery, or is it the people who are willing to admit when they stumble?
Oh, it is always the people who admit they are struggling. Always. Flawless people are just intimidating. You can admire them, sure, but you can't really connect with them on a human level.
Because perfect masters do not need grace.
No.
They don't require forgiveness. But a flawed nobody is someone who acknowledges they are tilted and clumsy.
Yeah.
They need constant grace.
And when you realize that you desperately need that grace from others because of your own emotional misfires, you become far more willing to extend that same grace when someone else inevitably misjudges their own reactions. The gaps in our perfection are the only places where true human connection can actually take root.
By taking off the armor of the title, you are exposing the soft, vulnerable human underneath. You're saying, I do not have complete control. And ironically, that vulnerability is what makes you safe to be around.
It dismantles the defensive posture. And this dismantling process becomes incredibly urgent for the author because he is standing on the precipice of the biggest identity shift of his entire life, age 65.
The end of the line for the salaryman.
The transition from the highly structured world of expectations into the vast, completely unstructured void of retirement.
It's a huge leap. He talks extensively about this looming milestone in the essays. Historically, the retirement age in Japan was 60. But due to shifting demographics and pension ages, there is this modern corporate system of extended employment. It keeps workers on board until 65.
Right.
And he has a great, slightly cynical term for this 5-year purgatory. He calls it salaryman graduate school.
It is a brilliant analogy. I mean, graduate school is often a holding pattern, right? It is an extension of the academic structure for people who need more time or more qualifications before they are thrust into the unpredictable reality of the open market. In his case, the open market is literally the rest of his life.
But the prospect of leaving that holding pattern terrifies most people. To illustrate this, the author brings up a fascinating newspaper article his wife showed him. The headline of the article was incredibly striking. It read, "Even with $1.5 million, I'm anxious about fire."
FIRE being the movement that has completely swept the globe in recent years. Financial independence, retire early. The premise is super simple. Accumulate enough wealth as rapidly as possible so you can exit the mandatory workforce decades ahead of schedule.
Right, but the reality is much darker. The article details the life of a specific salaryman who made fire his absolute singular goal starting from his second year at his company. To reach that $1.5 million target, he instituted a regime of extreme, almost punishing deprivation.
Yeah, it's intense.
He and his wife stripped their living expenses to the absolute bone. At home, their diet consisted almost entirely of cheap bean sprouts, tofu, and chicken breasts.
A life completely devoid of culinary joy or spontaneity.
And it gets worse.
Hmm.
For lunch, every single working day, this man went to the company cafeteria and ate the cheapest item on the menu, an 80 yen bowl of plain soba noodles, day in, day out, for years.
Just for context, 80 yen is roughly 50 cents. You can imagine the nutritional and sensory quality of that meal.
Exactly. He knew it was driving him insane. So, as a tiny, tragic rebellion against his own austerity, he carried a secret stash of high-end, expensive chili powder in his uniform pocket.
Wow.
He would sprinkle this luxury chili powder over his 50-cent noodles just to give himself a fleeting illusion of flavor and dignity.
It is a heartbreaking detail. The high-end chili powder basically represents the tiny sliver of his humanity that he refused to completely extinguish while he punished himself for this financial goal.
But here is the massive twist that the author focuses on. This man endured this brutal lifestyle. He hit his massive financial target. He has the $1.5 million sitting in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And he cannot bring himself to pull the trigger and actually retire. He is completely paralyzed with anxiety.
This is where the author's concept of the nobody becomes absolutely essential for survival. Why is this millionaire terrified of retiring? Because he spent his entire adult life building a fortress of identity around being the diligent saver.
Oh, wow.
He became the title. He wore the mascot costume of the sacrificing, hyper-focused employee for so long that it literally froze to his skin.
He doesn't know how to exist without the 80 yen noodles. The struggle gave him purpose.
Exactly. If he retires, he becomes a nobody. And he has spent zero time cultivating what that nobody actually likes or wants to do. He looks at the endless expanse of a Tuesday morning with no office to go to, and it fills him with absolute dread because there is no Rishisa to guide his actions anymore.
So the anxiety of the fire movement and the anxiety of the 65-year-old salaryman facing mandatory retirement are fundamentally the exact same fear. It is the terror of losing the script.
It is. And the author uses a concept from behavioral psychology to explain the danger of this paralysis. He applies the peak end rule.
Okay, let's break that down because this is a really crucial psychological mechanism.
So the peak end rule, developed by Daniel Kahneman and others, states that humans do not judge an experience based on a comprehensive average of every single minute. Instead, our brains take a massive shortcut. We judge an experience almost entirely on two specific points: the emotional peak, whether that was intensely positive or intensely negative, and the very end of the experience.
Kahneman famously demonstrated this with a medical study involving colonoscopies, right?
Yes, exactly.
Patients who had a longer, more drawn-out procedure, but where the discomfort was slowly eased at the very end, remembered the entire experience much more positively than patients who had a shorter procedure that ended abruptly with high pain. The total duration didn't matter at all. The ending dictated the entire memory.
Exactly. Now, apply that evolutionary quirk of human memory to a 40-year career.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The author realizes that if he spends his salaryman graduate school years, those final 5 years leading up to 65, dreading the future, paralyzed by anxiety, and clinging desperately to his fading title, he's going to trigger a catastrophic bad end to his career.
So even if he had incredible peaks in his 30s and 40s, big promotions, successful projects, whatever, if the last memory of his working life is fear and pathetic clinging, that will completely poison his retrospective view of his life's work.
He will remember his career as a tragedy. So to ensure a good ending, he has to actively prepare to be a nobody. He has to consciously start dismantling his own ego before society forcefully rips the title away from him.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How do you actually prepare for that? He uses this wonderful metaphor from a time when he used to tutor junior high school students. The students would inevitably complain, "Why do we have to memorize all these historical dates and complex math formulas? We are never going to use this in real life."
The eternal question of the middle schooler.
Always. And his answer to them was what he calls the balloon analogy. He told them that right now, their brains are like fresh, uninflated rubber balloons. Have you ever tried to blow up a brand new balloon? It is incredibly difficult. You have to force the air in, your cheeks hurt, it feels like the rubber absolutely refuses to yield.
It requires immense initial pressure.
But, he tells the students, once you force that first breath in and stretch the rubber, something permanent changes. Even if you let all the air out, even if you completely forget the specific math formulas or the dates of the Edo period, the rubber of the balloon remains pliable. It has been stretched. So when you actually need to learn something vital later in life, blowing up the balloon the second time is easy.
Because the effort wasn't about retaining the specific knowledge, it was about permanently expanding the capacity to receive new things.
Right. And the author realizes that at age 65, he needs to blow up his balloon again. He has spent 40 years stretching his capacity in one very specific corporate direction. Now he wants to become what he playfully calls a new breed.
Which is a fun linguistic callback. In Japan, older generations often refer to the disruptive, hard to understand younger generation as the Shinjin-rui, the new breed. The author decides he wants to be a new breed, meaning an older person who actively embraces a second beginnerhood.
He wants to stretch the balloon of his identity in completely alien directions so that when the title of Sallerman is finally gone, he has the capacity to absorb new joys.
He is deliberately practicing taking off the costume, but what is truly staggering about these essays is that he doesn't confine this philosophy just to his professional life or his hobbies.
No, he goes way deeper.
He takes this exact same lens, this ruthless stripping away of idealized titles, and applies it to the most intimate, sensitive area of human existence, his own family.
Yeah. This is where the text shifts from philosophical musings on career to a profound, often harrowing, psychological excavation. We usually view our family members through the ultimate untouchable labels. We don't see them as individual humans, we see them as mother and father.
We demand that they perfectly embody the Rashisa of parenting. We expect them to be the flawless Yajirobe, perfectly balanced, infinitely wise, constantly nurturing.
Because the survival of a child depends on the illusion of the parent's infallibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you become an adult, maintaining that illusion often requires massive amounts of cognitive dissonance, especially if your childhood contained trauma.
And the author's childhood contains significant trauma.
Let's look at his reflections on his mother. For a long time, he just saw her as this terrifying, unpredictable force. But when he strips away the title of mother and looks at the historical human being, he uncovers a chilling reality. His mother was a survivor of the Tokyo air raids during World War II.
We really have to understand the context of that event to grasp this. The firebombing of Tokyo created firestorms that consumed entire districts, literally sucking the oxygen out of the air and reaching temperatures that melted metal. It was an apocalyptic landscape.
Amidst that literal hell on earth, his mother, who was just a young girl at the time, witnessed one of her friends die a gruesome, violent death right in front of her. The author pieces together that the sheer magnitude of this trauma caused a fundamental rupture in her psyche. To survive the unendurable horror, her emotional core simply froze.
She dissociated.
Exactly, and a part of her never thawed out.
The psychological mechanism of survival often requires shutting down empathy and emotional processing. If you feel the full weight of the trauma, it will destroy you.
But the consequence of that freezing was that she carried profound contradictions into her adult life and her parenting. On one hand, she possessed this terrifying, almost unnatural physical strength, and she could lash out with extreme violence when triggered.
Because trauma doesn't disappear, it just gets displaced.
The author recounts a specific, vivid memory from his childhood. He was a young boy, playing, and he got into a minor argument with his cousin. In a flash of typical childhood anger, he yelled at his cousin, "You bastard!"
A standard, if impolite, playground outburst.
But the reaction from his mother was terrifying. She snapped instantly. She crossed the room, grabbed her young son with the strength of a fully grown man, hurled him against the wall, and began slapping him repeatedly across the face, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You sounded just like T! You sounded just like T!"
T being her own younger brother, the author's uncle. An uncle who had a history of being violently abusive, and who had apparently screamed that exact phrase at her in the past.
In that moment, she wasn't disciplining her son. She wasn't even seeing her son. The auditory trigger of the phrase bypassed her conscious mind completely, and she was violently defending herself against her abusive brother. She was trapped in the past.
It is a textbook trauma response, but the author also notes that this terrifying violence existed alongside behavior that was bizarrely infantile.
Yes, this is the detail that gave me chills. He remembers watching her eat aminato, these sweet sugar coated beans. Instead of putting them in a bowl or eating them with her fingers like an adult, she would simply tilt her head back, hold the crinkling plastic bag over her face, and pour the beans directly into her mouth. He describes her in that moment as an adult girl.
An adult body carrying a psyche that permanently paused its emotional development on the night the firebombs fell.
If he views her strictly through the label of mother, she is a monster. A mother should not hurl her child against a wall. A mother should be emotionally regulated. But when he drops the title and views her as a nobody, just a traumatized human being navigating a shattered internal map, the resentment shifts into something far more complex.
It shifts into a melancholic understanding. He is not excusing the abuse, he is identifying the mechanics of it. He is seeing the wobbly, deeply broken Yajirobe.
And he applies this exact same brutal clarity to his father. He recounts an incident that haunted him for 50 years. He calls it the bicycle incident. The author was a young boy, the oldest among a group of kids playing in the courtyard of their housing complex. Suddenly, a line of older kids on bicycles came speeding through the area, racing recklessly, creating a genuinely dangerous situation for the smaller children playing.
A classic neighborhood hazard.
But his father's intervention was shocking. To stop the speeding bicycles, his father didn't yell at the riders. He didn't stand in their way. Instead, he grabbed his own son. The author dragged him to the center of the path, forced him to stand there, and began slapping him violently across the face. He slapped him nearly 20 times, right in front of all his friends and the bicycle riders. Wow. It is an agonizing image. The public humiliation coupled with the physical pain. For a child, the sheer injustice of it is incomprehensible. Why is the father punishing the innocent son instead of the guilty riders?
Now, I want to jump in here and clarify for you, the listener. We aren't endorsing these extreme parenting methods at all. And it's clear the author carries deep scars from this. My immediate instinct is to condemn the father entirely. It seems like an act of cowardly, displaced rage. But what stands out to you about how the author processes this? Because the narrative doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't.
He holds on to the bitter confusion of this memory for half a century. It isn't until he is a grown man and a father himself that the lock finally clicks open, through a physical transmission of understanding.
Yes. One day, the adult author is having a heated, intensely frustrating argument with his own teenage son. In a flash of lost control, his own Yajirobe tilting, he slaps his son across the face, and the moment his palm strikes his son's cheek, he feels a sharp, sudden pain in his own hand. A blood blister instantly forms on his skin from the impact.
The physical toll of the violence rebounding on the perpetrator.
As he stares at the blood blister on his hand, feeling the stinging pain and the immense crushing guilt of what he just did to his child, the memory of his father from 50 years ago comes rushing back. But this time, he views it from the father's perspective.
He realizes the geometry of the courtyard, the speed of the bikes, and the split-second window for decision-making.
He realizes that 50 years ago, his father saw a potentially fatal accident unfolding. A small child is going to get crushed by those bikes. The father needed a shock and awe tactic to instantly freeze the entire courtyard to stop the chaos in its tracks before someone died. But he couldn't hit the neighbor's kids, so he made a terrible calculation. He took the responsibility on himself by using his own son as a human sacrifice. He used his son as a scapegoat to create a scene so shocking that all the bicycles slammed on their brakes.
The author feels the throbbing in his own hand and suddenly comprehends the agonizing, suffocating loneliness his father must have felt in that moment. The father chose to bear the physical pain in his hands and the lifelong emotional hatred of his own son just to prevent a tragedy.
Does this realization mean the author forgives the father? Does understanding the mechanism erase the 50 years of trauma?
The author is remarkably clear-eyed about this in the text. He states that he doesn't necessarily forgive the actions. The pain was real, the scars are real, but forgiveness isn't actually the goal here. The goal is understanding.
Okay.
By stripping away the idealized title of flawless father, he sees a desperate, terrified man making a horrifyingly lonely choice in a fraction of a second. He accepts that his father was just a nobody trying to stop a disaster, the only way his flawed mind could compute in that instant.
It fundamentally changes the internal narrative. He stops demanding that the past be different. He accepts the people who raised him as deeply flawed actors who were handed impossible scripts.
And we see how this practiced ability to see the objective reality beneath the familial label saves him from being dragged down by other family crises later in life, particularly in the case of his younger brother.
Oh, this is a vital contrast. The brother suffers from severe bipolar disorder and a crippling day trading addiction that has completely drained his finances. Now, the societal expectation, the rishisa, of being an older brother would dictate that the author must endlessly rescue him, get entangled in the emotional drama, and feel personally responsible for his brother's failures.
Because the label demands a bleeding heart. It demands you treat a medical crisis as a moral failing that can somehow be fixed with enough familial love or stern lectures.
But the author absolutely refuses to wear that costume. When his brother enters a manic phase and starts firing off obsessive, paranoid emails attacking the author's wife over a perceived slight regarding a memorial service, the author doesn't engage in a shouting match. He doesn't play the role of the wounded older brother.
No, he recognized the reality of the situation. This is not a family squabble. This is a psychiatric patient in the grip of mania.
He steps back and engages third-party administrative help. He reflects on a lesson he learned years ago when his own son was acting out and they saw a professional counselor. The counselor was effective precisely because they didn't get wet with familial emotion. They remained dry, objective, and boundary-driven.
By treating his brother not as a brother, but as a flawed individual requiring specific, dry medical boundaries, the author protects his own family's sanity. It is the ultimate practical application of the nobody philosophy. Stepping out of the emotional costume allows you to deal with the reality in front of you, rather than the expectation of how you should feel.
It is incredibly heavy, but it is undeniably liberating. He survives the trauma of his parents, he navigates the chaos of his brother, he approaches the end of his corporate utility, and he finally steps out onto the open plain. He is standing there, holding his uninflated balloon. The noise has stopped. The demands have ceased. He is officially a nobody.
And this is where the profound silence of retirement actually begins.
Right. What does a man who has spent 40 years following instructions actually do when there are no more instructions?
He has to listen for what he calls his voiceless voice, or in Japanese, konakiko.
I love this concept. He introduces it using a political metaphor. He notes a recent national election where the ruling political party won a massive, sweeping victory. But if you only looked at the loud voices on social media or the angry pundits on TV news programs, you would have thought the ruling party was universally despised and about to be crushed.
Because the loudest voices are rarely the most representative.
Exactly. The author realizes that the loud voices on TV are just the visible tip of the iceberg. The people who actually determined the outcome of the country were the silent majority. The millions of people who didn't post online, who didn't yell at protests, but who quietly walked into the voting booth and cast their ballot. That silent, underlying current of desire is the true, voiceless voice.
And he takes this macroscopic political observation and applies it to the microcosm of the human mind. For 40 years, the loud voices in his head were the demands of his job, the anxiety of paying the mortgage, the stress of the commute, the need to maintain his rishisa. Those loud external demands drowned out everything else.
But when you strip all of that away, when you become a nobody, the loud voices are finally voted out of office. And for the first time in decades, you can actually hear your own silent majority. You can hear the weird, illogical, deeply personal desires that have been waiting patiently in the dark.
And the manifestations of his voiceless voice are beautifully, hilariously mundane.
They are so random. The very first thing his silent majority demands is a ukulele. He literally goes out, buys a ukulele, and sits in his house, terribly strumming 1970s folk songs, completely ignoring the groans of his wife and family.
He isn't trying to become a master musician. He is just enjoying the tactile vibration of the strings.
And then, the absolute pinnacle of his liberation. He seriously debates going to a barber to get a punch perm, a tightly curled, slightly aggressive hairstyle closely associated with Yakuza or tough guys.
Why a punch perm at age 65? It isn't a midlife crisis. It is an act of what the Japanese call adult buying otanagai. Like when an adult uses their salary to buy an entire box of the cheap candy they were only allowed to have one piece of as a child.
He explains that when he was a teenager, he desperately wanted a punch perm. He thought it looked incredibly cool. But the strict rules of his junior high school absolutely forbade it. And by the time he graduated, he was entering the corporate world, and the conservative rules of the Japanese office environment forbade it.
Society has literally been telling him no regarding his hair for 50 years.
But now, he is a nobody. There is no principal to suspend him. There is no boss to demote him. The punch perm is no longer just a hairstyle. It is a physical, curly manifestation of his total liberation from societal expectation. He can wear his hair however his voiceless voice dictates.
This deep yearning for unvarnished, unapologetic authenticity is something he actually traces back to the pop culture heroes of his childhood. He analyzes why certain characters resonated with him more than others.
Oh, he brings up a debate that defined Japanese playgrounds in the 1960s, Astro Boy versus 8-Man. Both were massively popular cyborg robot heroes, but the author strongly preferred 8-Man, and the reason why is a fascinating psychological tell.
Astro Boy, for all his power, was perpetually a child. He was designed with the face of a little boy, and he interacted with the world with a child's wide-eyed innocence and unquestioning morality. He was safe.
8-Man, on the other hand, was an adult. He operated in the gritty world of a private detective agency. He wore a sharp suit. He smoked cigarettes, not for nicotine, but to cool down his internal nuclear reactor, which is, objectively, the coolest reason to smoke ever conceived.
It really is. But it wasn't just the aesthetic, it was 8-Man's psychological complexity that drew the author in.
He vividly remembers one specific episode of the 8-Man anime. 8-Man is confronting a group of super intelligent mutant children, these arrogant superhumans who believe they are superior to everyone. A massive crisis occurs. A hydrogen bomb is hurtling toward their base. The mutant children aren't worried. They calculate the trajectory, look at 8-Man, and say, "Shoot it down with your laser. We know you have a capability."
They view him merely as a tool, a function to be executed.
Right. But 8-Man does something shocking. He refuses. He pretends his laser is broken. He drops to his knees and begs the arrogant mutant children for help. He lets the hydrogen bomb get closer and closer and closer. He waits until the absolute last possible millisecond, until these super intelligent beings are literally trembling in mortal terror, weeping with fear. Only then does 8-Man draw his weapon and shoot the bomb out of the sky.
It is a profound moral lesson disguised as a cartoon. Why did 8-Man risk annihilation? Because he understood that sheer intellect and capability are meaningless without empathy. He wanted to teach these arrogant beings what it actually feels like to experience vulnerable human fear.
The author realizes that as a child, he didn't want a flying robot friend like Astro Boy. He wanted a reliable, complex adult who didn't patronize him. He wanted a hero who understood the dark, terrifying realities of the world and operated on a deeper, uncompromising moral code.
And this same psychological preference completely explains his lifelong love for Yakuza and outlaw cinema.
Right, he talks about his admiration for actors like Ken Takakura, who famously played these stoic, honorable outlaws. At first glance, it seems contradictory. Why would a diligent, rule-following corporate salaryman idolize criminals?
Because the cinematic outlaw is the ultimate nobody. The outlaw exists entirely outside the societal hierarchy. They have no corporate title to protect. They don't hide behind the polite, suffocating mask of Rashisa.
When a salaryman smiles at you, you have to wonder if it's genuine or if it's just customer service. When a Ken Takakura outlaw glares at you, it is pure, unadulterated reality. When they make a promise, it binds their soul, not just a contract. The author craved that unvarnished authenticity. He wanted to exist in a space where his actions were dictated by his core values, not his job description.
But to reach that state of pure authenticity, to finally hear the voiceless voice, you have to confront the one thing that terrifies modern, busy humans more than anything else:
The void.
silence. The author introduces a fascinating concept from auditory psychology here to explain why the transition to retirement is so physically jarring. The concept is called "one silence is more."
This concept completely shifted how I view free time. Let's really dig into the mechanics of this illusion.
So, in the study of auditory perception, researchers have found that the human brain processes time differently based on the continuity of an event. If you play a single, unbroken tone for 10 seconds, the brain perceives it as a heavy, substantial duration. But if you play two separate 5-second tones with just a microsecond pause between them, the brain perceives the total duration as shorter, even though the actual time elapsed is exactly the same.
The brain marks time by boundaries and interruptions.
Exactly. Now, crucially, this illusion also applies to the absence of sound. If you experience one continuous, unbroken block of silence, your brain processes it as a massive, heavy event. It dilates time. One silence is more. But if that silence is constantly broken by little noises, the time feels like it passes quickly.
So apply this auditory illusion to the schedule of a corporate salaryman. Their entire life is a series of broken silences. You wake up, check your email interruption, you commute, listen to the radio interruption, you sit in 3 meetings, answer 10 phone calls, rush home, watch TV. The silence of their free time is fractured into tiny 10-minute increments. Because it is broken, the time flies by. They never actually feel the weight of it.
But then the salaryman turns 65. The title is stripped away. They wake up on a Tuesday morning and there are no emails, there are no meetings, there is no commute. There is just one massive, continuous block of unbroken silence stretching from dawn until dusk.
And the brain panics. The one silence feels suffocatingly heavy. It feels like an eternity. That is exactly why the guy with the $1.5 million couldn't pull the trigger on fire. He was standing on the edge of the diving board, staring down into the terrifying, unbroken silence of the rest of his life, and he scrambled back to the safety of his ADN noodles.
The noise of the struggle was his life preserver.
But the author argues that the true test of becoming a TV, nobody is learning to sit in that heavy silence without turning on the TV, without rushing to find a new busy work task and just letting it wash over you. It's like finally turning off the loud exhaust fan in your kitchen. Suddenly you can actually hear the birds outside.
You have to let the silence endure long enough for the voiceless voices to finally feel safe enough to speak.
And when he finally sits in that silence, what does his voiceless voice tell him to do? It doesn't tell him to conquer the world. It tells him to relearn English, not to negotiate a corporate contract, but just for the pure joy of connecting with foreign tourists. It tells him to volunteer to teach math to junior high kids. It tells him to strum a ukulele. The ukulele and the punch perm are his birds.
He fills the terrifying void of silence with his own self-generated music. He stretches the balloon with joy.
We have been on quite a journey with this author today. We started by examining the heavy, restrictive armor of societal labels and the exhausting performance of Rashisa. We moved to the mirror, confronting the wobbly, imperfect reality of our physical and emotional Yajirobe, and discovering that acknowledging our clumsiness is actually the secret to human connection.
We journeyed into the dark, complicated history of his family, seeing how dropping the idealized titles of mother and father allowed him to view their trauma and their terrible decisions with objective, melancholic grace.
We navigated the psychological trap of the FIRE movement and the necessity of preparing the mind for the end of the career. And finally, we arrived at the joyous, slightly absurd image of a 65-year-old man, freed from all expectations, sitting in the silence of his living room, contemplating a Yakuza haircut while plucking a ukulele.
It really forces us to ask a profound question about the trajectory of our own lives. We expend a massive amount of energy, time, and stress trying to become a somebody. We want the promotion, the recognition, the name tag that proves we matter. But the author's deeply lived experience suggests that the true measure of a successful life isn't found in the accumulation of those titles. The real victory is how gracefully and how joyfully you can transition back into being a nobody.
It is about having the courage to realize that the costume you're wearing isn't actually you. And with that in mind, I want to leave you with a challenge. Think about the primary title you carry right now, the label you use to introduce yourself at parties, the one that dictates how people expect you to behave. Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and that title has been completely erased from the world. Your company doesn't exist. Your social hierarchy is gone. Nobody expects anything from you. The silence is vast and unbroken. If you were finally truly a nobody, what is the very first thing your voiceless voice would ask you to do? Take off the costume. Go find out.